There are moments in the long, blood-soaked history of the Adeptus Astartes when the usual calculations of war break down completely. Moments when chapter masters stand in their command chambers, staring at tactical displays that show threats so overwhelming that every conventional response seems inadequate. In those rare, desperate hours, a decision must be made that carries weight beyond mere strategy, a decision that reaches down into the deepest vaults of the fortress monastery, into the sacred halls where heroes sleep away the centuries in mechanical dreams. A decision to wake them all, every dreadnought, every ancient warrior entombed in adamantium and ceramite, every legend who should have died centuries or millennia ago, but was instead sealed into a walking sarcophagus to serve beyond the natural span of even a space marine's extended life. When a chapter wakes all its dreadnoughts at once, it means something has gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. It means the survival of the chapter itself hangs by a thread. It means that the normal rules no longer apply, and every asset, every weapon, every fragment of accumulated tactical wisdom must be brought to bear or all will be lost. This is not a routine deployment. This is not the careful, measured awakening of a single venerable ancient to lend his wisdom to a particularly difficult campaign. This is the breaking of glass in case of emergency. This is the moment when a chapter looks into the abyss and realizes it must throw everything it has into the breach or be consumed entirely. And what gets thrown into that breach is not just firepower and armored bulk, but history itself. Living, breathing, thinking history, wrapped in tons of reinforced plating and armed with weapons that can level buildings. The psychological impact on a chapter when this happens cannot be overstated. For the younger Space Marines, many of whom have never seen more than 1 or 2 dreadnoughts deployed at a time, the sight of dozens of these towering war machines being activated simultaneously is both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. These are not just weapons. They are their predecessors, their teachers, their spiritual ancestors. Some of these warriors fought in battles that are now legend. Some remember the chapter's founding. Some have tactical databases that span conflicts across hundreds of worlds. And now they all walk together, for the first time in living memory, because the alternative is annihilation. For the dreadnoughts themselves, the experience is something else entirely. Imagine being pulled from dreamless sleep, from the void between consciousness and oblivion, only to find yourself surrounded by others like you, warriors who understand the peculiar horror of your existence. The neural shock of activation is bad enough when you wake alone, but to wake and immediately sense through your machine's spirits that you are not the only ancient being roused. That creates a strange communion, a shared recognition of what this moment means. If they are all here, all awake at once, then the threat must be existential. And that knowledge colors everything that follows. This is the story of what happens when a chapter wakes every dreadnought for the final battle. It is a story of desperate necessity and terrible cost. It is a story of heroes who cannot die being asked to face death one more time. It is a story about the price the Adeptus Astartes pay for their victories and the sacrifices that never make it into the official histories. Most importantly, it is a story about what it means to be a dreadnought in the grim darkness of the far future, where even death offers no escape from duty. The halls beneath every fortress monastery hold secrets, not the kinds of secrets that involve conspiracy or hidden agendas, but the quiet, reverent secrets of sacrifice and service. And nowhere are these secrets more profound than in the chambers where the dreadnoughts sleep. To understand what happens when they all wake, we must first understand what they are, what they have become, and what they have lost in becoming it. The walking tomes. What is a dreadnought? Picture a warrior at the moment of his greatest triumph and his greatest tragedy. A space marine, already superhuman by any reasonable standard, fighting in the Emperor's name across some distant battlefield. His brothers depend on him. His chapter needs him. He has become everything he was designed to be through years of conditioning, surgical enhancement, and brutal training. He is a weapon of the Imperium, honed to perfection. And then, in an instant, that weapon is shattered. Perhaps it is an Orc Warboss's power claw that tears through ceramite armor and ruptures organs that even space marine physiology cannot heal. Perhaps it is a Tyranid Bio Titan's crushing mandibles that snap his spine in 3 places. Perhaps it is a Chaos Sorcerer's Warp spawned blade that inflicts wounds on both flesh and soul simultaneously. The specific cause matters less than the result: a warrior too valuable to lose, too skilled to abandon, but too broken to ever fight again in his original form. This is where the nightmare begins. This is where duty transcends death and becomes something far more terrible. The decision to enter a space marine in a dreadnought is never made lightly. It requires approval from the highest levels of chapter command, consultation with the chaplains who understand the spiritual implications, and assessment by the tech marines who will perform the actual surgery. Because make no mistake, what follows is not healing, it is transformation. It is the surgical removal of everything deemed non-essential to the warrior's function, paired with the implantation of neural interfaces so invasive that the procedure itself can kill through shock alone. And that is before considering what happens to the mind when it realizes what has been done to it. The process begins in the apothecarian, where the dying marine is stabilized just enough to prevent total shutdown of his enhanced organs. His gene seed must be preserved regardless of what happens next, so apothecaries work with practiced efficiency to ensure those precious genetic materials remain viable. Meanwhile, the tech marines prepare the sarcophagus that will become the warrior's new body. This is not like fitting someone for armor. This is selecting a tomb, a prison, a second skin that will never come off. The sarcophagus itself is a marvel of technology that the Adeptus Mechanicus can barely maintain, let alone recreate. Many patterns date back to the Great Crusade or even earlier, to the Dark Ages before the Imperium existed. Inside that armored shell waits a bath of nutrient-rich amniotic fluid, neural connection ports, and life support systems that will sustain organic tissue indefinitely. The dying marine's body is carefully dismembered. Arms and legs go first, as they are no longer needed. The torso is reduced to its essential components: the brain, certain vital organs, fragments of the nervous system. What remains is grotesque, a biological remnant that would inspire horror if anyone could see it. But no one will see it because it gets sealed inside the sarcophagus, floating in that life, sustaining fluid, wired into systems that will interpret neural signals and translate them into movement, into weapon fire, into the machine's fury. The neural integration is where the true horror manifests. Imagine every sense you have ever known being stripped away and replaced with something fundamentally alien. You no longer see through eyes but through optical sensors that register heat signatures, target acquisition data, and threat assessment algorithms. You no longer hear through ears but through acoustic sensors that filter out irrelevant noise and highlight enemy vocalizations or weapon signatures. Touch becomes pressure readings transmitted through armored plating. Smell and taste simply cease to exist, sensory inputs deemed unnecessary for a war machine. The first moments of consciousness after integration are uniformly described as traumatic beyond description. The newly interred warrior tries to move arms that no longer exist, tries to breathe with lungs that are supplemented by mechanical systems, tries to scream and hears instead the mechanical growl of Vox speakers. Some go mad immediately, some never truly recover. The strongest adapt, learning to accept their new existence as the price of continued service. But even the strongest carry psychological scars that never fully heal. The Dreadnought chassis itself is a walking fortress, standing anywhere from 3 to over 6 meters tall depending on the pattern. The most common pattern in the 41st millennium is the Castroferrum, that boxy, angular design that has become iconic in its functionality. Newer patterns like the Redemptor Dreadnought sacrifice longevity for increased power, burning through their pilots at an accelerated rate. Older patterns like the Contemptor, dating back to the Great Crusade, are rarer but more advanced, incorporating technologies that can no longer be fully replicated. And then there are the truly ancient relics. Leviathan Dreadnoughts, massive siege engines so taxing on their pilots that they should only be awakened for short periods, but which carry firepower that can level buildings in seconds. Each dreadnought is armed according to its role and the chapter's preferences. Close combat specialists might carry a massive power fist capable of crushing battle tanks, paired with a built-in heavy flamer to purge infantry that get too close. Fire support variants mount assault cannons, las cannons, or missile launchers on both arms, becoming mobile artillery platforms. Ironclad variants exchange some firepower for additional armor, designed to breach fortifications that would stop lesser forces. The weapons are not merely attached to the chassis but integrated into it, extensions of the pilot's will, just as his original arms once were. But weapons and armor, impressive as they are, represent only the physical dimension of what a dreadnought is. The true significance lies in what is preserved inside that armored shell. These are not mere soldiers, but veterans of dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of battles. When a chapter loses a captain to wounds, interring him in a dreadnought preserves not just his combat capabilities, but his tactical wisdom, his understanding of the chapter's traditions, his memories of battles that younger Marines know only as legends. A dreadnought is a library of warfare, a repository of experience that would otherwise be lost. This is why chapters venerate them so deeply, why they are treated as honored ancients even as they are deployed as weapons. The oldest dreadnought in the Imperium is Jorn the Fell, Handed of the Space Wolves, who fought alongside Liman Russ himself during the Great Crusade and survived the Horus Heresy. He has been alive for over 10,000 years, most of it spent in dreamless sleep, awakened only for the direst emergencies or to share his wisdom at the turning of centuries. Jorn represents the extreme end of dreadnought existence, a consciousness that has endured so long that he has become as much myth as machine. But every chapter has its own ancients, warriors who remember times and battles that have passed into legend. Understanding what a dreadnought is means understanding that they are simultaneously honored and pitied by their battle brothers. Honored for their sacrifice and their continued service. Pitied because that service comes at a cost that is difficult for those who have not experienced it to truly comprehend. A dreadnought pilot lives in isolation, cut off from the camaraderie that defines space marine culture. He cannot feast with his brothers in the great halls. He cannot participate in the rituals of brotherhood that bind a chapter together. He exists in the mechanical half-life, serving a duty that never ends and that offers no prospect of peace until the machine that sustains him is finally destroyed. When a chapter wakes all its dreadnoughts at once, it is not simply deploying weapons. It is calling forth every warrior who paid the ultimate price, but was denied the mercy of death. It is asking those who have already given everything to give more. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, that is exactly what they do. The sacred halls of slumber deep beneath the fortress monastery, in chambers that even many space marines never enter, the dreadnoughts wait. These halls exist in every chapter that possesses these ancient war machines, and while their specific configurations vary according to the chapter's preferences and the geology of their homeworld, certain elements remain constant. The halls are always sacred spaces, treated with the same reverence as the chapter's most holy relics. They are always deep, protected by layers of rock and reinforced ceramite from orbital bombardment or enemy assault. And they are always quiet, a silence that is both peaceful and profoundly melancholic. The Space Wolves call their chamber the Hall of the Revered Fallen, located in the deepest levels of the Fang, their massive fortress monastery that pierces the atmosphere of Fenris. Here, in the cold darkness beneath tons of mountain rock, the chapter's dreadnoughts stand in alcoves carved from the living stone, each position marked with honor tablets recording the warrior's name, his deeds, and the date of his interment. The temperature is kept deliberately cold, a preservation measure that also serves a symbolic function. The dead should be cold, and though these warriors are not truly dead, they are not truly alive either. The chill reminds everyone who enters that they walk among ghosts. Other chapters have their own variations on this theme. The Ultramarines maintain immaculate sepulchres where each dreadnought's alcove is adorned with battle honors and citation scrolls, everything meticulously documented according to the Codex Astartes. The Blood Angels keep their ancients in vaults surrounded by works of art, beauty offered as small comfort to warriors who can no longer fully appreciate it through their mechanical senses. The Dark Angels sequester their dreadnoughts in chambers protected by layers of security that few in the chapter can penetrate, because some of those ancients remember secrets that must be kept at all costs. The daily rituals in these halls follow patterns established over millennia. Each morning, Tech Marines enter to perform diagnostic checks on the slumbering machines, ensuring that stasis fields remain stable and life support systems function within acceptable parameters. They anoint the armored carapaces with sacred oils, reciting litanies of preservation as they work. The oils serve both practical and spiritual functions, maintaining seals and joints while also consecrating the machines to the Emperor's service. Every bolt is checked, every connection verified, every system tested to ensure that when the time comes to wake these warriors, they will be ready. Chaplains also maintain a presence in these halls, though their visits are less frequent and serve a different purpose. They come to pray over the entombed warriors, to remind them through their stasis dreams that they are not forgotten, that their sacrifice is honored. Some chapters maintain that the Dreadnoughts can hear these prayers even in their deepest sleep, that some fragment of consciousness remains aware even when all else is shut down. Whether this is true or simply a comforting belief varies by chapter and by individual Dreadnought, but the prayers continue regardless. They serve as much to comfort the living as to reach the sleeping. The atmosphere in these halls is unlike anywhere else in the fortress monastery. In the training cages, there is the sharp crack of bolter fire and the clash of combat practice. In the great halls, there are feasts and the roar of brotherhood. In the libraries, there is the quiet rustle of scrolls and the murmur of scholarly debate. But in the Dreadnought halls, there is only the hum of stasis fields and the whisper of techmarine prayers. It is a place of endings and waiting, where time moves differently than in the world above. Some space marines come to these halls to pay their respects to specific ancients. A sergeant might visit the alcove of the captain who trained him, now entombed for 3 centuries, but remembered with gratitude. A veteran might stand before a dreadnought that once saved his life, offering silent thanks to a warrior who has saved countless lives over the span of centuries. These visits are not encouraged or discouraged, they simply happen, part of the chapter's living culture of remembrance. The Dreadnoughts stand witness to these small moments of connection, though whether they are aware of them is impossible to say. The stasis fields themselves are marvels of technology that few outside the Adeptus Mechanicus truly understand. They slow biological processes to an imperceptible crawl, preventing the organic components of the Dreadnought from degrading over time. But they do something else as well, something that has implications for the pilot's consciousness. Time in stasis is not experienced linearly. Moments of awareness bubble up like dreams, fragmentary and confused. Some pilots report experiencing centuries of stasis as a single night's troubled sleep. Others describe an endless void where thought itself ceases, only to resume in the instant of awakening, as if no time has passed at all. The arrangement of the alcoves often reflects the chapter's history and hierarchy. The oldest dreadnoughts occupy places of highest honor, closest to the chamber's center or to its primary entrance. More recently interred warriors take their places along the periphery, though all are accorded respect. In some chapters, dreadnoughts are grouped by the company they served in life, maintaining unit cohesion even in sleep. In others, they are arranged by the battles where they fell, creating a geographic map of the chapter's campaigns rendered in armored sarcophagi. The physical space of these halls is often larger than strictly necessary for the number of dreadnoughts currently housed there. This is deliberate. Chapters plan for the future, for the inevitable casualties that will require new interments. Empty alcoves wait like graves prepared in advance, a reminder that the price of warfare is paid in the bodies of heroes. Some chapters mark these empty spaces with plaques bearing the names of current officers deemed worthy of potential interment, a macabre honor that acknowledges both their skill and the likelihood that they will eventually fall. Others leave them unmarked, blank stone waiting to be filled. The security around these halls is absolute, not because anyone fears theft or sabotage from within the chapter, but because these chambers represent the chapter's accumulated military wisdom and combat experience. The loss of a dreadnought to enemy action in battle is tragic. The loss of an entire hall of ancients to a successful enemy infiltration would be catastrophic, a blow from which a chapter might never fully recover. Defense turrets are concealed in the ceiling. Servo skulls patrol constantly, their sensors attuned to any anomaly. Access is restricted to those with explicit authorization, and even then, every entry is logged and reviewed. Yet despite all the security and reverence, There is also sadness in these halls. Everyone who enters them understands what they represent: warriors who should have found peace but were instead bound to eternal service. The chapter honors them because their sacrifice deserves honor. But there is also an undercurrent of guilt, an unspoken acknowledgement that perhaps it would have been kinder to let them die. This tension is never fully resolved, because both perspectives are true. The Dreadnoughts are invaluable assets whose loss would weaken the chapter, and they are suffering warriors trapped in a form of existence that is as much curse as blessing. When the order comes to wake all the Dreadnoughts, the halls transform. The quiet peace shatters as tech marines rush to deactivate stasis fields and begin activation sequences for every ancient simultaneously. The hum of power systems ramping up echoes off stone walls. Vox speakers crackle to life after decades or centuries of silence. And in that moment, the sacred halls of slumber become something else entirely, an armory of living history preparing for war. Life between battles, the price of immortality. To understand what happens when all the Dreadnoughts wake together, you must first understand what existence is like for them individually between battles, because that existence is so profoundly different from anything a normal human, or even a normal space marine, experiences, that it shapes everything about how they perceive the world and their place in it. The price of their immortality is measured not in years, but in the slow erosion of everything that once made them who they were. Consider the fundamental nature of stasis sleep. It is not like natural sleep, where dreams process the day's experiences and the mind cycles through various stages of rest. Stasis is a forced shutdown, a suspension of consciousness so complete that time itself loses meaning. Some Dreadnought pilots describe it as falling into a void, a darkness so total that awareness itself ceases. Others report fragmentary dreams that feel more real than reality, phantom sensations of limbs they no longer possess, memories of battles that might be real or might be constructions of a mind desperate for stimulation in an environment of absolute sensory deprivation. The confusion that accompanies awakening from stasis varies with how long the Dreadnought has slept. A warrior who has been dormant for a few months might wake with relatively clear memories of why he was put to sleep and what his current identity is. But a warrior who has slept for decades experiences something closer to amnesia. The organic brain, even one as enhanced as a space marine's, struggles to maintain continuity of consciousness across such vast gaps. The result is a disorientation that can take hours or even days to fully resolve, assuming it resolves at all. Worse than the temporal disorientation is the ongoing degradation of personality and memory over multiple sleep cycles. Each time a Dreadnought is awakened, fought, and returned to stasis, something is lost. Specific memories fade: first, the face of a battle brother, the details of a particular engagement, the layout of some fortress assaulted centuries ago. Then broader memories begin to blur: what it felt like to move in a body of flesh and bone, the taste of real food, the sensation of sunshine on skin. Eventually, for the oldest Dreadnoughts, even core identity becomes uncertain. They know they were someone, some great warrior deemed worthy of this dubious immortality, but the specific person they were slips away like water through skeletal fingers. This mental deterioration is not universal or inevitable, but it is common enough that every chapter must account for it. Some Dreadnoughts maintain remarkable clarity for centuries or even millennia. Jorn the Fell, handed is the prime example, a warrior who has endured for over 10,000 years and still possesses enough mental acuity to provide meaningful counsel on matters of strategy and chapter tradition. But Jorn is exceptional, and even he admits in his moments of honesty that each awakening requires more effort to remember who and what he is. For every Jorn, there are dozens of lesser, known ancients whose minds have fractured under the weight of centuries. The psychological toll manifests in various ways. Some Dreadnoughts become taciturn, speaking only when absolutely necessary, and then in clipped, mechanical phrases that suggest the human behind the Vox speakers has receded far from the surface. Others become verbose, desperate to prove to themselves and others that they still possess personality and thought beyond pure combat function. A few develop obsessions, fixating on particular enemies or battles or chapter traditions with an intensity that borders on madness, and some simply go feral, the conditioning and discipline that made them space marines eroding until what remains is pure aggression barely controlled by their remaining loyalty to the Emperor. Murderfang of the Space Wolves represents the extreme end of this spectrum. Once a noble warrior, something broke in his psyche after interment. Now he must be kept in stasis between battles because he cannot distinguish friend from foe, attacking anything that moves with berserker fury. The Space Wolves use him as a weapon of last resort, unleashing him against enemies and then freezing him with Hellfrost technology before he can turn on his own brothers. It is a pragmatic solution to a tragic problem, but it also represents what every Dreadnought pilot fears: they might become a weapon with no awareness, a ghost of purpose with nothing else remaining. The isolation compounds everything. A normal Space Marine lives among his battle brothers, training with them, eating with them, participating in the rituals that bind the chapter together. A Dreadnought experiences none of this. He sleeps alone in his alcove between battles. When awake, he cannot fit in the chapter's normal spaces, too large and too heavy for corridors and chambers designed for warriors of human scale. He cannot participate in physical training, his body long since reduced to component organs floating in amniotic fluid. He cannot share meals, having no functioning digestive system. He cannot even shake hands in greeting, his massive power fist capable only of crushing or destroying, too crude for gestures of brotherhood. This isolation creates a strange dual existence. On one level, the Dreadnought is deeply integrated into the chapter, a revered figure whose counsel is sought and whose presence inspires awe. On another level, he is fundamentally separate, set apart by the very transformation that allows him to continue serving. He is simultaneously insider and outsider, brother and other, human and machine. This contradiction cannot be resolved, only endured, and the endurance required erodes the soul in ways that are difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. The Dreadnought's relationship with time itself becomes distorted. Where a normal human or even a normal Space Marine experiences time as a continuous flow, a Dreadnought experiences it in fragments separated by voids. He fights a battle, is returned to stasis, and wakes to find that decades have passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. His battle brothers have aged, if Space Marines can be said to age. Some have died, others have risen in rank. The chapter itself has evolved, adopting new tactics or retiring old traditions. And the Dreadnought must try to orient himself in this changed landscape, while dealing with the confusion of awakening, and the knowledge that soon he will sleep again, that more decades will pass, that when he next wakes the world will have changed once more. For the newest Dreadnoughts, those who remember their mortal existence with painful clarity, this temporal fragmentation is its own form of torture. They mourn the life they have lost, the experiences they will never have again. They grieve for battle brothers who will grow old and die while they sleep away the centuries. They struggle with the knowledge that everyone they knew before their interment will eventually be gone, that they will outlive everyone they ever cared about unless the machine housing them is destroyed in combat. This grief is not discussed, because to speak of it would be to question the honor of their sacrifice. But it exists nonetheless, a silent weight that every newly interred warrior carries. The oldest Dreadnoughts have moved beyond this grief, having outlived so many generations that attachment itself seems pointless. They exist in a state of emotional detachment, viewing their battle brothers with a kind of benevolent distance. These younger warriors are allies, fellow servants of the Emperor, worthy of protection and respect. But they are also temporary, mayflies who will flicker and die while the Dreadnought endures. Forming deep emotional bonds with such ephemeral beings only leads to pain, so the ancients withdraw into themselves, becoming counselors and weapons, but not truly brothers in the way they once were. The physical degradation mirrors the psychological. With each activation cycle, the organic components of the Dreadnought deteriorate slightly. The brain, despite being bathed in nutrient fluid and protected by the best technology the Imperium can muster, is still organic tissue subject to the laws of biology. Neurons die and are not replaced. Synaptic connections weaken. The Dreadnought's responses slow imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably over centuries. Tech Marines compensate where they can, installing additional processors to handle cognitive tasks and routing neural signals through redundant pathways. But there is only so much they can do. Eventually, the biological substrate itself becomes the limiting factor. Some Dreadnought patterns accelerate this degradation deliberately. The Redemptor Dreadnought, designed for the Primaris Marines, burns through its pilot at an accelerated rate. The systems are so powerful and the neural load so intense that even a Space Marine's enhanced physiology cannot sustain it indefinitely. Pilots interred in Redemptors know they have bought years rather than centuries, that their service will be measured in decades at most. For some, this is a relief, a promise that their suffering will end sooner rather than later. For others, it is a bitter irony, saved from death only to face a slower but more certain demise. The Leviathan pattern presents a different problem entirely. These massive siege dreadnoughts impose such extreme neural strain that pilots can only remain active for limited periods before requiring extended rest. The pressure on the biological brain is immense, causing conditions ranging from confusion to complete mental dissolution. During the Great Crusade, when resources were more abundant and the need was desperate, Leviathan pilots were sometimes kept active until their minds simply broke, then replaced with new pilots in a grotesque cycle of consumption. In the 41st millennium, most chapters use their Leviathans sparingly, awakening them only for battles that require their overwhelming firepower, and then immediately returning them to stasis before permanent damage occurs. Yet despite all the horror, all the isolation and degradation and loss, the dreadnoughts endure. They wake when called. They fight when deployed. They offer wisdom when consulted. They do their duty because duty is all they have left, because they are Space Marines first and last and always, and Space Marines do not shirk their obligations no matter the cost to themselves. This is what makes them both tragic and magnificent. Warriors who have sacrificed literally everything, including their own mortality, to serve an Imperium that will never fully appreciate the price they have paid. When a chapter wakes all its dreadnoughts at once, it is calling forth all of this accumulated suffering and service simultaneously. It is gathering every warrior who paid the ultimate price, every mind that has endured centuries of isolation, every consciousness that has been fragmented by the weight of too much time. And it is asking them to fight one more battle, to endure one more awakening, to give one more time when they have already given everything. The fact that they answer that call, every time, speaks to something fundamental about what it means to be a Space Marine. But it also speaks to the cruelty of a universe that demands such sacrifice and offers nothing in return but more war. The decision to wake them all, the command chamber of a Space Marine fortress monastery, is typically a place of calculated deliberation. Chapter masters and their councils weigh options, assess threats, deploy forces with the precision of master strategists who have access to centuries of tactical doctrine and real-time battlefield intelligence. Decisions are made based on doctrine, experience, and the cold calculation of resource expenditure versus strategic gain. But there are moments when all that careful deliberation collapses into a single, terrible realization. We are not going to win this conventionally. That realization is what leads to the decision to wake every dreadnought. It is not made lightly because the implications extend far beyond simple tactical deployment. When you wake all the ancients, you are acknowledging that the situation has deteriorated beyond the point where normal chapter responses will suffice. You are burning through resources that cannot be easily replaced. You are putting at risk warriors whose loss would be felt for generations. And perhaps most significantly, you are admitting that despite all your planning and all your preparation, events have spiraled beyond your control. The specific threats that necessitate such a decision vary, but they share certain characteristics. They must be existential, meaning they threaten not just defeat in a particular engagement, but the survival of the chapter itself. They must be immediate, requiring a response so overwhelming and so swift that there is no time for reinforcements or for conventional force buildup. And they must be acknowledged by the chapter's leadership as beyond the capacity of its standard military assets to handle. All three conditions must be met. Anything less and the risk of waking all the dreadnoughts cannot be justified. Consider the Battle of the Fang, perhaps the most famous example of this scenario, playing out in recorded chapter history. In the 32nd millennium, the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion, led by their Daemon Primarch Magnus the Red, launched a massive assault on Fenris, the homeworld of the Space Wolves. The great wolf Herrick Ironhelm had been lured away with most of the chapter's fighting strength, pursuing Magnus across the Segmentum Obscurus in what turned out to be an elaborate feint. When the Thousand Suns fleet emerged from the warp above Fenris, only a single great company remained to defend the Fang. Less than 100 space wolves faced a force that numbered in the tens of thousands, backed by chaos sorcery and led by a being of godlike power. The Wolf Lord Ver Greylock, commanding the defense, faced impossible mathematics. Even if every space wolf killed 100 enemies, they would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The fortress monastery's defenses were formidable, but against sustained assault by forces that included daemon engines and reality-warping sorcery, those defenses would eventually fail. Normal reinforcement protocols called for holding as long as possible while sending for help, but help was weeks away at minimum, and the fortress might fall in days. The decision to wake the Dreadnoughts was not a tactical preference, but an operational necessity. Greylock's request to the Iron Priests responsible for the Hall of the Revered Fallen was both simple and staggering in its implications. Wake them all. Every ancient who could still fight, every warrior who had been sleeping away the centuries in the deep places beneath the Fang. When the command was given, 12 Dreadnoughts began their activation sequences, including Jorn the Fell, handed himself, roused from a slumber that had lasted over a millennium. 12 does not seem like many compared to the tens of thousands of enemies at the gates, but each of those 12 represented tactical expertise and combat power equivalent to entire squads of normal space marines. More importantly, their awakening sent a signal to the chapter: if the ancients walk, the battle is dire indeed. The decision calculus in such situations is brutal. Each dreadnought that is activated and deployed carries the risk of permanent loss. On the battlefield, anything can happen. A lucky shot from an enemy heavy weapon might penetrate armor that has withstood centuries of warfare. A tactical error might put an ancient in an untenable position. The chaos of combat might result in a dreadnought being isolated and overwhelmed. And if a dreadnought falls, it represents not just the loss of an individual warrior, but the loss of centuries of accumulated experience and knowledge that can never be replaced. The chapter becomes poorer for every ancient that is destroyed, but the alternative to accepting that risk is even worse: the loss of the chapter entirely. And so the chapter master, or whoever holds command in his absence, makes the choice. He sends the order to the tech marines responsible for maintaining the dreadnoughts. He instructs the chaplains to prepare the appropriate rites. He accepts the burden of potentially sending these honored warriors to their final deaths, and he does so knowing that if the gamble fails, history will judge him harshly. But if he does not make the attempt, there will be no one left to judge anything, because the chapter will have ceased to exist. The protocols for mass dreadnought activation vary by chapter, but follow similar patterns. First comes the authorization itself, typically requiring the chapter master's personal seal, or in his absence, the approval of the senior command staff. This is not a decision that can be delegated to lower ranks because the implications are too significant. Once authorization is secured, the tech marines begin the actual work of bringing the sleeping warriors back to consciousness. This is normally a delicate process when done with a single dreadnought, allowing time to monitor systems and make adjustments as needed. When done with multiple units simultaneously, it becomes a carefully orchestrated sequence of activations, staggered to prevent power system overload, and to allow sufficient tech marine attention for each awakening. The psychological preparation is equally important. Chaplains move through the halls, offering prayers over each dreadnought as its stasis field deactivates. These prayers serve multiple purposes. They provide spiritual comfort to warriors who are about to wake into what may be their final battle. They help focus the waking minds on their duty and their purpose. And they remind the tech marines performing the activations that they are working with holy relics, not mere machines. The combination of technical procedure and spiritual ritual is characteristically Imperial, a fusion of the mechanical and the mystical that defines so much of the Imperium's approach to technology. As the dreadnoughts begin to wake, questions start to filter through Vox channels. The newly awakened warriors are confused, disoriented, struggling to remember where they are and why they have been roused. Some recognize the tech marines tending to them. Others do not, having slept so long that entirely new generations of brothers now maintain the chapter. All of them ask variations of the same question, why am I awake? And the answer they receive is always the same. The chapter needs you. We all need you. And that answer, simple as it is sufficient because it speaks to the core of what they are. They are needed. Therefore they will serve. The burden on the chapter master who gives this order cannot be overstated. He is asking warriors who have already sacrificed everything to sacrifice potentially even more. He is taking men who should be allowed to rest, even if that rest is just the void of stasis sleep, and dragging them back into consciousness for one more battle. He is making a choice that his predecessors avoided, that perhaps they were able to avoid because their situations, dire as they might have been, never quite crossed the threshold into existential crisis. And he must live with the consequences of that choice, regardless of whether the battle is won or lost. Some chapter masters hesitate. They look for other options, other ways to address the threat without committing their dreadnoughts en masse. They calculate and recalculate, hoping to find some combination of conventional forces and tactical brilliance that will suffice. But eventually, if the situation is truly as dire as it appears, they come to the same conclusion: there is no other way. The dreadnoughts must wake, all of them, and once that conclusion is reached, hesitation becomes liability. The order must be given clearly and quickly, because every moment of delay is a moment the enemy uses to press their advantage. For the ancients themselves, being awakened under such circumstances creates a unique form of awareness. When a single dreadnought wakes for a specific mission, he can imagine he is chosen for his particular expertise, or for some quality that makes him especially suited to the task at hand. When all the dreadnoughts wake together, there can be no such illusion. They are being awakened because every asset must be thrown into the breach. They are not special or chosen. They are simply available and therefore required. This can be demoralizing for warriors accustomed to being venerated as chapter legends. But it can also be clarifying, a reminder that in the end, all pretense is stripped away and only service remains. The decision to wake all the dreadnoughts marks a threshold crossing. It acknowledges that normal rules no longer apply, that the chapter is fighting for its very survival. And once that threshold is crossed, everything that follows takes on a desperate intensity. The battle ahead will not be won through clever tactics or superior strategy. It will be won, if it is won at all, through sheer determination and the application of every resource the chapter possesses. The dreadnoughts are the ultimate expression of that resource commitment, the final card played when all other options have been exhausted. And when they march to war together, everyone who sees them understands exactly what that means. This is the end, one way or another. The awakening process, the first sensation is confusion, not the mild disorientation of waking from normal sleep, but a fundamental uncertainty about existence itself. There is a moment, perhaps stretching for seconds or subjectively for much longer, where the awakening consciousness cannot determine whether it is real or merely another dream in the endless sequence of dreams that fill the void of stasis. The darkness that has surrounded it for decades or centuries begins to thin, and with that thinning comes awareness, and with awareness comes the terrible realization I am still here. The dreadnought's organic brain, floating in its nutrient bath, starts to receive signals again. Neural pathways that have been dormant flicker to life, sending electrical impulses through tissues that have remained static for so long that the sudden activity feels like fire in the veins. The life support systems that have maintained the bare minimum of biological function begin ramping up to full operational capacity, flooding the organic components with oxygen, rich fluid and hormones designed to stimulate consciousness. It is not a gentle awakening. It is forceful, almost violent, a yanking back from the void into something approximating life. As consciousness solidifies, the dreadnought's mind reaches for its body and finds instead the machine. This is the moment of existential horror that never quite goes away no matter how many times it has been experienced. The warrior tries to move fingers and feels, instead the hydraulic servo motors of a power fist. He tries to take a breath and receives feedback from atmospheric processors and oxygen regulators. He attempts to open eyes and instead activates optical sensors that begin feeding him targeting data and threat assessments. Every instinctive action he attempts reminds him that he is no longer what he once was, that the body he knew has been replaced by something alien and inhuman. The tech marines monitoring the awakening process watch their display screens carefully, tracking neural integration levels and system responsiveness. They murmur prayers to the Omnissiah as they work, asking the machine's spirits to accept their slumbering occupants once more. These prayers are not merely symbolic. The Dreadnought is a fusion of biological and mechanical components so complete that the boundary between them becomes blurred. The machine's spirit, whatever that term really means in the context of Imperium technology, must be coaxed into cooperation with the pilot's consciousness. When this integration goes smoothly, the Dreadnought wakes with full control of its systems. When it does not, the results can range from sluggish responses to complete system lockup, requiring emergency shutdown and restart. Different Dreadnoughts wake differently. Those who have been in stasis for relatively short periods, months or a few years, often achieve consciousness with remarkable speed. Their memories are fresh enough that they remember who they are and where they are. They might feel disoriented but not lost. A tech marine can exchange a few Vox communications with them, verify that systems are functional, and proceed with the activation sequence without major complications. These are the easy awakenings. If anything about dragging a warrior from sleep to prepare him for battle can be called easy. The more difficult awakenings involve ancients who have slept for decades or centuries. When these warriors first regain consciousness, they often do not immediately recognize their surroundings. The chapter's fortress monastery might have been renovated since they last saw it. The tech marines tending to them might be strangers, members of the chapter who were not even born when the Dreadnought last walked. Entire generations of battle brothers have lived and died in the span of sleep that to the Dreadnought felt like a single dreamless night. This temporal dislocation creates a cascade of questions that all boil down to the same fundamental inquiry: when am I? Bjorn the Fell-handed, awakened during the Battle of the Fang, had been asleep for over a millennium. When consciousness returned to him, his first awareness was confusion about why he had been roused at all. The protocols were specific. Bjorn was to be awakened only for the most dire circumstances, or for ceremonial occasions of the highest importance. Neither seemed likely in what his fragmented memories told him should be a routine period of chapter history. When the tech marines informed him that Magnus the Red himself was assaulting the Fang, Bjorn's response was telling. He had fought Magnus before during the burning of Prospero, when both were still fully corporeal beings, rather than the wraith-like existences they had become. The knowledge that the old war still continued, that the same enemies fought the same battles across spans of time so vast they defied comprehension, provided a kind of orientation. Some things, at least, did not change. For newer Dreadnoughts, those who remember their mortal existence with painful clarity, the moment of awakening brings fresh grief. Every time they wake, they must confront anew the fact that they are no longer what they were. The body they once possessed is gone, reduced to a few essential organs. The life they might have lived as a space marine, with all its rituals and brotherhood, has been replaced by this mechanical half-existence. Some cry out in anguish when they wake, their Vox speakers distorting the sound into mechanical screams that echo through the halls. Others fall silent, withdrawing into themselves, as they struggle to accept their reality once more. The tech marines have learned to recognize the signs of difficult awakenings. If a Dreadnought's Vox communications are confused or hostile, if its weapons systems activate without authorization, if its power levels fluctuate wildly, it means the integration is not going smoothly. In such cases, the tech marines must make quick decisions. Do they proceed with the activation despite the complications, accepting that the Dreadnought might not be at full combat effectiveness? Or do they abort the sequence, returning the warrior to stasis and trying again later? When multiple Dreadnoughts are being awakened simultaneously for a critical battle, there is often no time for the luxury of second attempts. The activation must proceed, and the problems must be managed as best as possible. As each Dreadnought achieves full consciousness, the next challenge is orientation and briefing. The warrior needs to understand why he has been awakened and what is expected of him. For some, this is straightforward: there is a battle, you are needed. These are your objectives. For others, particularly those who have slept for very long periods, the briefing must include context that younger brothers would take for granted. The current chapter master's name and style, changes in chapter organization or doctrine, the nature of the enemy being faced. All of this information must be conveyed quickly, because there is no time for leisurely updates or extended debriefings. When all the dreadnoughts wake together, they become aware of each other in ways that are difficult for those who have not experienced it to understand. The machine spirits of their chassis communicate on frequencies beyond normal Vox channels. They sense each other's proximity, their awakening, their readiness. This creates a kind of communion, a shared recognition among the ancients that something unprecedented is happening. They do not need to be told explicitly that this is a crisis of the highest order. They can feel it in the very fact of their simultaneous awakening. Dreadnoughts who have not fought together in centuries, or who have never fought together at all, suddenly find themselves part of a unified formation, a gathering of ghosts preparing for what may well be their final battle. The psychological impact of this simultaneous awakening reverberates through the chapter. Younger space marines who have heard tales of the ancients, but never seen more than one or two deployed at a time, suddenly confront the reality of dozens of these towering war machines being prepared for combat. The sight is both inspiring and unsettling. Inspiring because it represents the chapter's accumulated might and wisdom being brought to bear. Unsettling because it makes visceral the desperation of the situation. If the ancients must all walk together, then the chapter faces a threat unlike any it has encountered in living memory. For the dreadnoughts themselves, the experience of waking together creates a strange camaraderie. They are isolated from their mortal brothers by the barriers of their mechanical existence, but they can understand each other in ways that others cannot. They know what it feels like to be wrenched from stasis into consciousness. They know the confusion and the grief and the slow, painful process of remembering who and what they are. And they know that whatever battle awaits them, they will face it alongside warriors who truly understand the price they have paid for the privilege of continuing to serve. The final stage of awakening involves weapons testing and systems verification. Each dreadnought cycles through its armaments, firing test shots from its ranged weapons into blast-proof chambers and activating its close combat weapons to verify motor function. Tech Marines watch carefully, making final adjustments to targeting systems and ammunition feeds. The dreadnoughts themselves must relearn the feel of their weapons, the timing of trigger pulls that are now processed through neural interfaces rather than physical fingers. It is like learning to shoot all over again, except compressed into a few minutes instead of years of training. When the last dreadnought confirms operational status, when the final systems check comes back green, when the Tech Marines pronounce all the ancients ready for deployment, a threshold is crossed. The decision to wake them has been made. The awakening process has been completed. All that remains is the march to war, and with it, the knowledge that some of these warriors who have endured for so long may finally find the peace that has been denied them. The dreadnoughts move toward the armory exits, their footsteps shaking the stone, their presence transforming the sacred halls of slumber into something else entirely, an assembly ground for legends preparing to become history one last time. The gathering storm, deployment and preparation. When the dreadnoughts emerge from their halls into the broader fortress monastery, something fundamental shifts in the atmosphere. The usual ordered chaos of space marine preparation for battle takes on an almost ritualistic quality. Younger battle brothers pause in their own armoring to watch as the ancients pass, their massive forms dwarfing even the superhuman warriors around them. Serfs bow their heads in respect as these walking legends move through corridors that seem suddenly too small for their bulk. And everywhere, the message spreads, the ancients walk, all of them. The loading bays where the dreadnoughts are outfitted for deployment become centers of intense activity. Each ancient must be examined, his weapons blessed, his armor anointed with sacred oils and hung with purity seals. The rituals have been refined over millennia, but must now be conducted simultaneously for every dreadnought, rather than the usual measured attention given to individual deployments. Tech Marines work with practiced efficiency, their servo skulls darting around each chassis checking for weak points in armor or or suboptimal weapon mounting. Chaplains move among them as well, their skull, helmed visages somehow appropriate in this gathering of warriors who exist in the space between life and death. The weapons' loadouts vary according to each dreadnought's role and preference. Some carry the traditional pairing of a close combat weapon and a ranged weapon, a combination that has proven effective across 10,000 years of warfare. Others are configured for specialized roles, fire support platforms mounting twin las cannons or missile launchers, siege breakers armed with assault drills and inferno cannons, or close assault specialists, bristling with lightning claws and heavy flamers. Each configuration represents a decision made long ago, often when the warrior was first interred, but also reflects accumulated experience and preference refined across countless battles. The ammunition feeds must be loaded carefully. Dreadnought weapons consume ammunition at prodigious rates, and resupply in the field is often impossible. Each ancient receives maximum loads of whatever ordnance his weapons require: belt-fed rounds for assault cannons, missile racks fully stocked, flamer fuel tanks topped off. The weight of all this ammunition would be crushing to a normal human or even a space marine in power armor, but the Dreadnought's powerful servos and robust frame handle it easily. What would be a burden to flesh becomes merely a question of load distribution and center of gravity for the machine. As the Dreadnoughts are prepared, they begin to communicate with each other, their vox channels creating a network of tactical discussion and coordination that has not existed in this form for decades or centuries. Veterans who last fought together in battles that are now legend discuss strategy and unit cohesion. They assign themselves roles based on their capabilities and experience, creating an informal command structure that leverages the strengths of each warrior. Some of them remember fighting together before, their partnership forged in campaigns that younger brothers know only from chapter records. Others are meeting for the first time, aware of each other's reputations, but having never fought side by side. All of them understand that what they create in these moments of preparation may determine whether the chapter survives. The regular Space Marines watch this process with a mixture of awe and concern. For many of them, seeing a single dreadnought deployed is a memorable event, a rare occurrence that marks a battle as particularly significant. But to see dozens of them, to witness the ancients conversing with each other as they prepare for war, to feel the weight of accumulated centuries of experience concentrating in one place, this is something else entirely. It is both privilege and omen, a reminder of the chapter's glorious history, and a warning about the desperate nature of the present threat. Some of the younger Space Marines approach the Dreadnoughts, seeking blessings or offering prayers. They touch the armored hulls reverently, as one might touch a holy relic. For many chapters, this is encouraged, a way of creating connection between the ancients and the current generation of warriors. The Dreadnoughts respond according to their personalities and mental states. Some offer words of encouragement or tactical advice, their mechanical voices carrying the weight of experience. Others remain silent, focused on their preparations or simply not interested in small talk with warriors they may outlive by centuries. And a few, the most damaged or withdrawn, barely acknowledge the attention at all, their minds turned inward or fixated on the coming battle to the exclusion of all else. The chaplains take this opportunity to deliver final blessings and reminders of duty. They speak of the Emperor's will and the chapter's honor. They remind the Dreadnoughts that they fight not for glory or recognition, but for the protection of humanity and the preservation of the chapter's legacy. These words are familiar, the same litanies that have been spoken before every battle for 10,000 years. But they take on added significance when spoken to warriors who have heard them hundreds or thousands of times before, who have fought in the name of Emperor and chapter across spans of time that defy human comprehension. The loading into drop pods or transport vehicles presents its own challenges. Dreadnoughts are massive, weighing several tons each, and their deployment requires specialized equipment and careful planning. Drop pods must be individually configured to handle the weight and ensure safe deployment onto the battlefield. Land raiders and other transport vehicles must have their restraint systems checked and reinforced. Every dreadnought must be secured properly because a multi ton war machine breaking loose during transit can cause catastrophic damage to the transport and endanger other warriors. As this loading process proceeds, tactical briefings continue. The chapter's command staff provides updates on enemy dispositions and deployment zones. They outline the battle plan, such as it is, though everyone understands that plans rarely survive contact with the enemy, and this battle is likely to devolve into chaotic melee relatively quickly. The Dreadnoughts absorb this information, their tactical databases processing it and generating probable scenarios and optimal responses. Some of them have fought this enemy before, perhaps multiple times across centuries. Their input helps refine the plan, adding layers of experience-based insight that no amount of theoretical training can replicate. The atmosphere as deployment approaches becomes almost electric. Everywhere in the fortress monastery, Space Marines are preparing for battle, but the presence of all the Dreadnoughts creates a focal point of intensity. This is not routine deployment. This is the chapter committing everything it has to a single desperate throw. Win or lose, the chapter will be fundamentally changed by what happens next. Warriors who survive will carry the memory of fighting alongside legends. Warriors who fall will join those legends in the chapter's halls of remembrance. And the Dreadnoughts themselves, those who have already given everything, may finally find the release they have been denied for so long. Some of the ancients speak among themselves about this possibility, their private Vox channels carrying conversations that would disturb the younger brothers if they could hear them. They discuss the prospect of final destruction almost wistfully, acknowledging that, while their duty compels them to fight, with all their skill and determination, there would be a kind of peace in falling in battle, in finally being released from the mechanical life they have endured for so long. These conversations are not defeatist or suicidal. They are simply honest, an acknowledgement of the cost of their existence and the relief that true death might bring. But alongside these darker reflections, there is also purpose and even a kind of grim satisfaction. They have been warriors all their lives, first as mortal Space Marines and then as Dreadnoughts. Combat is what they know, what they excel at, what gives their continued existence meaning. To march to war alongside other ancients, to bring the full weight of their accumulated skill to bear against an enemy that threatens everything they have fought to protect. This is a privilege despite the cost. They are doing what they were made to do, what they have spent centuries perfecting. And if this is their final battle, then they will make it count. The final moments before deployment are marked by a ceremonial send-off that varies by chapter but carries similar themes across all of them. The chapter master or whoever commands the defense addresses the assembled warriors, regular Space Marines and Dreadnoughts alike. He speaks of duty and honor. He reminds them what they fight for. He acknowledges the sacrifice they are about to make, especially the ancients who have already sacrificed so much. And then, with prayers and battle cries echoing through the embarkation halls, the warriors board their transports and prepare to meet the enemy. As the Dreadnoughts settle into their deployment positions, secured against the rigors of drop pod assault or vehicle transit, a strange calm settles over them. The frantic preparation is over. The decisions have been made. All that remains is the battle itself. And battle is something they understand at a fundamental level. Their consciousness slips into combat mode, tactical assessments running constantly, threat recognition systems active, weapons armed and ready. They are no longer confused warriors struggling to remember who they are. They are what they have always been, what they will remain until destroyed instruments of the Emperor's will, walking fortresses of accumulated fury, legends preparing to become history one final time. The transports lift off, or the drop pods launch, carrying their precious cargo toward the battle that will determine the chapter's fate. And in that moment, as dozens of Dreadnoughts hurtle toward the enemy together for the first time in living memory, the weight of accumulated history becomes almost tangible. Every battle they have fought, every enemy they have destroyed, every brother they have seen fall, all of it concentrates into this single moment. They are ready. They have always been ready. And now, finally, the waiting is over. The battle itself. When ancients walk to war, the first impact comes with the thunder of drop pods slamming into the battlefield like meteors, or the roar of land raider engines as armored transports breach enemy lines. Either way, when the dreadnoughts emerge into the light of battle, the effect on the enemy is immediate and visceral. These are not mere soldiers or even exceptional warriors. These are legends made manifest, walking fortresses that carry the weight of centuries and the fury of the Emperor's finest. And when they begin to fight, the battlefield itself seems to recoil. Imagine the scene from the perspective of the enemy. You are prosecuting what you believe to be a successful assault. Your forces outnumber the defenders significantly. You have pushed through the outer defenses and are pressing toward your objectives. Victory seems inevitable, just a matter of time and continued pressure. And then the ground begins to shake with footfalls too heavy to be human. Armored shapes emerge from defensive positions or thunder down from orbit, each one 3 to 6 meters of weaponized hate and accumulated rage. Before you can fully process what you are seeing, the guns open fire. A dreadnought assault cannon speaks with a voice like tearing metal, each burst sending hundreds of mass, reactive rounds downrange. Infantry caught in that storm of fire simply cease to exist, reduced to components by the overwhelming volume of explosive projectiles. Lascannon beams slice through armor that would resist lesser weapons, turning vehicles into funeral pyres and fortifications into ruins. Missile launchers bracket areas with precision strikes, destroying concentrations of enemy forces before they can scatter. And that is just the ranged firepower, devastating as it is. When the dreadnought's close to melee range, the carnage intensifies. A power fist the size of a tank turret, wreathed in disruption fields, crushes whatever it contacts. Enemy vehicles crumple like foil. Xenos monstrosities designed to terrify and overwhelm find themselves physically lifted and torn apart. Even enemy elite troops in power armor discover that there are levels of force against which no armor suffices. The dreadnought's close combat capabilities are not subtle. They are raw physics applied with mechanical precision. Mass times velocity equals devastation. During the Battle of the Fang, when a dozen dreadnoughts, including Jorn the Fell, handed deployed to defend against the Thousand Suns invasion, the impact was decisive despite the overwhelming enemy numbers. The Thousand Suns forces included rubric marines, those soulless automata animated by sorcery and clad in ancient power armor, backed by Spireguard mortal troops numbering in the millions. Against such numbers, conventional defenders would have been swept away through sheer attrition. But dreadnoughts do not fight conventionally. Jorn himself, roused from over a millennium of slumber, led elements of the defense with tactical acumen that proved the value of his accumulated experience. He understood the fortress's defensive architecture intimately, having helped defend it in its early days. He knew which choke points were critical, where the enemy would concentrate forces, how to maximize the advantage of fighting from prepared positions. His presence stabilized Space Wolf morale that might otherwise have cracked under the pressure of impossible odds. And when Magnus himself appeared, manifesting within the Fang through sorcerous means, Bjorn faced the Daemon Primarch in single combat, buying time for the defense even as he knew he could not hope to defeat such a being through force alone. The other dreadnoughts deployed during that battle each contributed according to their capabilities. Some held critical passages, their armored bulk creating physical barriers that the enemy could not bypass without destroying them first. Others provided mobile fire support, their weapons systems targeting enemy concentrations and command elements. A few engaged in counterattacks, exploiting gaps in the enemy's advance to hit them from unexpected angles. The coordination was not perfect. Some of these ancients had never fought together before and were operating under the confusion of recent awakening. But their combined impact was undeniable. When a force of rubric marines attempted to breach one of the critical seals protecting the fortress's thermal reactors, they encountered dreadnoughts positioned specifically to deny that approach. The rubrics advanced with the mechanical precision of the automata they were, bolters firing in coordinated volleys. Against Space Marines in standard armor, such an assault might have succeeded through volume of fire if nothing else. Against dreadnoughts, the bolter rounds sparked harmlessly against ceramite plating. The dreadnoughts responded with weapons designed to destroy tanks, and the rubrics, for all their sorcerous animation, could not withstand that level of firepower. The breach attempt collapsed, though at the cost of one of the defending ancients whose systems finally failed under sustained assault. Yet the rubrics and their mortal support troops represented only the beginning of the threat. Magnus brought with him daemon engines, twisted amalgamations of machine and warp, spawned malevolence that radiated reality, warping corruption. These things could not be destroyed through conventional means alone because they existed partially outside normal reality. Several dreadnoughts engaged them, their machine spirits providing some protection against the daemonic influence. The battles were brutal and strange, physics bending around the combatants as the Imperium struggled to contain forces that should not exist within its bounds. One dreadnought, a venerable ancient whose name is recorded as Hrothgar, held a critical junction against a daemon engine for nearly 6 hours. The thing he fought was larger than he was, its weapons firing impossible ammunition that twisted space as it traveled. Hrothgar's armor was scarred and partially melted by the time reinforcements arrived to assist him, his systems operating at the edge of failure. But he held, because holding was what was required, and dreadnoughts do not abandon their positions while functionality remains. The most significant engagement came when Magnus himself confronted the remaining dreadnoughts that could be spared from other defensive positions. The Daemon Primarch had already slaughtered his way through Space Wolf defenders who could not match his power. His sorcery bent reality around him, making him nearly invulnerable to conventional attack, while his psychic might could crush Astartes in their armor or pull starships from orbit to crash as flaming missiles. Against such a being, normal tactical considerations became irrelevant. The dreadnoughts knew they likely could not stop him, but they could slow him, make him expend power, buy time for others to evacuate or fortify, or simply survive a few minutes longer. They charged him without hesitation, because that is what they were. Ancient warriors who had faced impossible odds before, and would do so again until destroyed. Magnus met them with contempt that turned to grudging respect as they refused to stop, refused to fall, refused to die easily despite his overwhelming power. He destroyed them one by one, tearing through armored carapaces with psychic force or incinerating them with warp fire. But each one cost him effort and time, and in a siege where every moment mattered, that cost was significant. Bjorn's engagement with Magnus was particularly notable because it was not the first time they had fought. During the burning of Prospero, when the Space Wolves had prosecuted the Emperor's sanction against the Thousand Suns, Bjorn had been a living warrior and Magnus still possessed a mortal form. Their reunion across millennia, one transformed into Daemon Primarch and the other into Dreadnought, carried weight beyond simple combat. Magnus recognized Bjorn despite the centuries and the mechanical shell, and Bjorn recognized Magnus, seeing in the twisted Daemon not just an enemy but a tragedy, a Primarch who had betrayed everything he should have stood for. Their fight was brief but intense. Bjorn landed hits that would have destroyed lesser beings, his power fist striking with force that cracked the stone of the fortress beneath them. But Magnus was beyond such things now, his form more warp stuff than flesh, capable of regenerating damage that would be fatal to anything truly mortal. He mocked Bjorn for the state to which he had been reduced, a consciousness trapped in a metal tome. Unable to die even when death would be mercy, Bjorn's response was characteristic, to serve as its own reward, and death will come when the Emperor wills it, not before. The battle raged for hours that stretched into days, the dreadnoughts holding positions throughout the fortress while the Thousand Suns pushed deeper into the Fang's depths. Some ancients fell to accumulated damage, their systems finally giving out under sustained assault. Others were isolated and overwhelmed by enemy numbers. A few self-destructed when defeat became inevitable, denying the enemy even the satisfaction of destroying them and taking as many foes as possible with them in their final moments. Each loss was felt by the chapter, a piece of history erased, wisdom that could never be recovered. But the Dreadnought's sacrifice bought what the defense needed most: time. Time for the Space Wolf fleet to return from its pursuit of Magnus's feint. Time for the fortress's defenders to organize more effective resistance. Time for critical systems to be protected or evacuated. And time for the youngest Space Wolves to learn what it meant to stand beside legends, to fight alongside warriors who had already given everything and were now giving more, to understand in the most visceral way possible what duty and sacrifice truly meant. When the Space Wolf fleet finally arrived, and broke the Thousand Sons orbital blockade. When reinforcements poured into the fortress to drive back the invaders, they found a scene of devastation. Thousands of Carols dead, significant portions of the fortress damaged or destroyed, and among the rubble and corpses, the shattered remains of dreadnoughts who had given their final measure of service. Some could be recovered and repaired. Others were too badly damaged. Their pilots finally granted the peace they had been denied for so long. The chapter mourned them as it would mourn any fallen brother, but with the additional weight of knowing that centuries of accumulated wisdom had been lost forever. The Battle of the Fang represents perhaps the most famous example of mass dreadnought deployment, but it is not unique. Throughout the Imperium's long history, other chapters have faced moments where their ancients all walked together. Each time, the pattern is similar: overwhelming threat, desperate defense, dreadnoughts deployed en masse as a force multiplier against impossible odds. And each time, the cost is measured in legends lost, warriors who survived centuries finally finding oblivion in the service of their chapter. The tactical effectiveness of such deployments cannot be denied. A single dreadnought can anchor a defensive position or spearhead an assault. A dozen dreadnoughts, coordinating their efforts and leveraging their combined experience, can accomplish feats that would require entire companies of regular space marines. They bring not just firepower, but judgment born of countless battles. The ability to read a battlefield and respond to changing conditions with the benefit of tactical databases spanning centuries. This makes them invaluable force multipliers when used properly, but the cost remains steep. Every dreadnought that falls represents an irreplaceable loss. The chapter becomes poorer not just in combat capability, but in institutional memory and wisdom. And while tech marines can sometimes salvage damaged dreadnought chassis for future use, the pilot cannot be replaced. What is lost when an ancient falls is unique, a perspective and experience set that developed across lifetimes and can never be recreated. The chapter must weigh this cost against the benefit of deployment, and when the choice is between losing ancients or losing everything, the choice becomes clear. But it is never easy, and the grief that follows is real and profound. The cost of victory, the silence after battle is always strange, a sudden cessation of violence that leaves the survivors disoriented and exhausted. For Space Marines, this transition from combat to aftermath is familiar, part of the rhythm of warfare they have known all their lives. But after a battle where all the dreadnoughts deployed together, the silence carries additional weight. It is punctuated by the cooling tick of overheated weapons and the labored cycling of damaged life support systems, and it is broken by the absence of voices that should be present, but are not, ancients who walk to battle, but will not walk back. The immediate aftermath involves damage assessment and casualty counting, tasks that are grimly routine after any engagement, but that take on special significance when the casualties include dreadnoughts. Tech Marines move through the battlefield with practiced efficiency, identifying damaged war machines and triaging them according to severity. Some dreadnoughts are still mobile, their systems battered but functional. These can return to the fortress monastery under their own power, though they move more slowly than usual, conserving energy and managing failing systems. Others are immobilized by damage, unable to move but still conscious, their pilots trapped in bodies that no longer respond to their commands. These require extraction teams and heavy equipment to recover. The worst cases are those where the armored sarcophagus has been breached. When that happens, when the adamantium shell that protects the pilot's organic remnants is penetrated, the results are almost always fatal. Exposed to the outside environment, the nutrient fluids drain away, the life support systems fail. The organic components that have been sustained for decades or centuries in their artificial womb begin to shut down within minutes. Some pilots remain conscious during this process, their last moments spent in the cold realization that the death they were denied when they were first interred is finally claiming them. Others slip away into unconsciousness, their last thoughts unknown. For the battle brothers who must witness this, the experience is traumatic in ways that normal combat casualties are not. When a Space Marine falls in battle, it is tragedy but also completion. He fought as he was made to fight, and he died as warriors have died since the beginning of warfare. There is honor in that, painful as the loss might be. But when a dreadnought finally falls, when centuries of service end in a burst of enemy fire or a catastrophic system failure, it feels like a different kind of loss. This was a warrior who should have found peace long ago, but was kept fighting through technology and duty. His final death comes not as release but as failure. The machinery that sustained him proved inadequate at last. The recovery of fallen dreadnoughts is accorded the highest priority. Even in the midst of ongoing combat or urgent tactical situations, efforts are made to retrieve damaged war machines and their pilots. This is partly practical. The chassis themselves are valuable and difficult to replace, while the gene seed of the fallen pilot must be recovered for the chapter's future. But it is also symbolic and spiritual. No brother is left behind, and this applies doubly to ancients who have served far beyond the normal span. They deserve to be brought home, to be laid to rest in the chapter's halls of remembrance, rather than left to rot on some distant battlefield. The process of extracting a pilot from a critically damaged dreadnought sarcophagus is delicate and often heartbreaking. The tech marine must first ascertain whether the pilot is still alive, which requires careful system diagnostics, because the usual vital signs might be masked by failing equipment. If life is detected, emergency procedures attempt to stabilize the organic components while the sarcophagus is carefully opened. What is found inside is usually disturbing even to space marines accustomed to warfare's brutalities, a remnant of a human being, withered and deformed by centuries in the nutrient bath, often grievously injured by whatever damaged the sarcophagus. Some can be saved, their wounds treated, and their bodies interred in new sarcophagi, if any are available. This gives them another lease on their mechanical existence, another span of service before they face destruction again. Others are beyond even the Imperium's advanced medical technology, their injuries too severe or their organic components too degraded to sustain further. For these warriors, the apothecaries can offer only final comfort, administering compounds that ease their passage into death, while chaplains offer prayers, an assurance that their duty is complete, their service honored, their sacrifice not forgotten. The emotional toll on the chapter extends beyond just the immediate losses. Every space marine who fought alongside the dreadnoughts, who watched these legends fight, and in some cases fall, carries those memories forward. For younger brothers who had never seen more than one or two ancients deployed, the experience of fighting beside dozens of them is formative. They witnessed firsthand what it means to serve beyond death, what the price of their existence might eventually become if they suffer wounds that would be fatal to lesser beings. And they watched some of those ancients fall, legends reduced to broken machinery and dying flesh. The chapter's leadership must grapple with the strategic implications as well. Each fallen dreadnought represents a permanent reduction in the chapter's combat capability and institutional knowledge. A warrior who had fought in hundreds of battles, whose tactical databases contained wisdom accumulated across centuries, is gone forever. No amount of training or experience can replace what is lost when an ancient falls, because the experience they carried was unique, shaped by perspectives that spanned lifetimes. The chapter becomes measurably poorer with each such loss. Yet there is also, paradoxically, a kind of relief in the deaths of some ancients. This is not spoken of openly, because to do so would seem to dishonor their sacrifice. But some dreadnoughts had endured for so long that existence itself had become torture. Their minds had degraded under the weight of centuries. Their personalities had eroded until little remained, but combat programming and fragments of identity. For these warriors, death in battle represents the release they were denied when they were first interred. Their brothers might mourn their passing, but they can also acknowledge quietly that the fallen have finally found peace. The recovery and interment of the fallen becomes a chapter-wide event, ceremonies conducted with all the gravitas the situation deserves. The damaged dreadnought chassis are brought to the chapter's halls of remembrance, where they are laid out in positions of honor. What remains of the pilots is extracted with utmost care and reverence, the withered organic remnants treated as the holy relics they are. Gene seed is harvested for future generations. Personal effects, where they exist, are catalogued and preserved, and the chapter gathers to honor warriors who gave not just their lives, but their afterlives to the Emperor's service. The eulogies delivered during these ceremonies emphasize different aspects. depending on the chapter's culture. Some focus on the warrior's deeds in life before interment, recounting the battles that made him worthy of the honor of becoming a dreadnought. Others chronicle his service after interment, the campaigns he participated in, the wisdom he shared, the brothers he saved through his actions. All of them acknowledge the terrible cost of that service and the relief that comes with its ending. The fallen ancient is praised for his dedication, mourned for his loss, and released to whatever peace awaits beyond death. For the dreadnoughts who survived the battle, their own processing of what occurred can be complex. They have lost brothers, warriors who understood their existence in ways that others cannot. Some of those lost might have been comrades from before their interments, friendships that spanned the transformation from flesh to machine and endured across centuries. The grief they feel is real, but also tinged with the knowledge that they too might fall in the next battle, or the one after that, or some distant future engagement. They are all living on borrowed time, their continued existence dependent on the vagaries of combat and the reliability of ancient technology. The chapter must also reckon with the material losses. Dreadnought chassis that are too damaged to be repaired represent permanent reductions in the chapter's arsenal. The knowledge of how to build new dreadnoughts from scratch has been largely lost to time, so each chassis that cannot be salvaged is essentially irreplaceable. Tech Marines work tirelessly to repair what can be repaired, cannibalizing damaged units for parts, performing miracles of engineering to keep the surviving war machines functional. But there are limits to what can be done, and some losses simply cannot be recovered from. The morale impact on the chapter can cut both ways. On one hand, the fact that the dreadnoughts deployed and the chapter survived demonstrates the effectiveness of that desperate gamble. The ancients proved their worth, and the threat that seemed existential was defeated. This can galvanize the chapter, reaffirming their faith in their capabilities and their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. On the other hand, the losses incurred and the desperation that necessitated the deployment in the first place serve as sobering reminders of the chapter's mortality. They are not invincible, and victories sometimes cost more than they seem worth in the moment of triumph. The long-term consequences extend beyond the immediate aftermath. The chapter must rebuild, replacing fallen brothers with new recruits, repairing damaged equipment, restoring depleted supplies. But the ancients cannot be replaced, at least not quickly or easily. The warriors currently serving in the chapter may one day be worthy of interment in dreadnought sarcophagi if they fall at the right moment in the right way. But that is potential, not certainty. The wisdom and experience that walked in those fallen machines is gone, and the chapter must find ways to compensate for that loss through other means. Some chapters commission works of remembrance to honor the fallen ancients, murals depicting their final battles, statues in the halls of the fortress monastery, scrolls recording their deeds and wisdom for future generations to study. These serve both practical and spiritual purposes, preserving what knowledge can be preserved while also providing a focal point for the chapter's grief and gratitude. The fallen are gone, but they are not forgotten, and their legacy continues to shape the chapter long after their deaths. For the battle brothers who fought alongside the ancients, the experience becomes a defining moment in their service to the chapter. They carry forward the memory of fighting beside legends, of seeing what it truly means to serve beyond death, of witnessing sacrifice on a scale that defies easy comprehension. This shapes how they approach their own service, how they evaluate risk and reward, how they understand the price that duty sometimes demands. In this way, the fallen ancients continue to influence the chapter through the warriors they fought beside, their last lesson delivered not through words, but through the example of their final battle. The cost of victory, when it involves the mass deployment and inevitable losses of dreadnoughts, is always steep. But in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, such costs are sometimes necessary. The chapter pays the price because the alternative is obliteration. They honor the fallen because honor is all they can offer. And they continue forward because that is what Space Marines do, carrying the weight of their dead and their history toward whatever battles await, knowing that one day they too might join those they mourn in the halls of remembrance. Famous examples through history, The Battle of the Fang stands as perhaps the most documented instance of mass dreadnought deployment in chapter history, but it is far from unique. Throughout the 10,000 years since the Horus Heresy, various chapters have found themselves in situations desperate enough to warrant waking all their ancients. Each such deployment tells a story of sacrifice and determination, and examining them reveals patterns that transcend individual chapters or specific threats. These are moments when the Imperium's finest reached into their deepest reserves and found warriors willing to fight one more time, regardless of cost. During the Second War for Armageddon, elements of the Blood Angels chapter deployed nearly every dreadnought they could field against the Orc invasions, led by Gaskell Throcker. The greenskin threat was overwhelming in its scale, billions of Orcs descending on a critical hive world that produced weapons and equipment for the entire subsector. Standard defensive calculations suggested that the forces available could not hold, that the world would fall despite the desperate resistance. The Blood Angels, already engaged in combat across multiple fronts, committed their dreadnoughts as mobile reserves, throwing them into critical battles where the line was about to break. The ancients of the Blood Angels brought their own particular fury to the war. Many were Death Company dreadnoughts, warriors who had succumbed to the Black Rage, the genetic curse that haunts all of Sanguinius's sons. These tortured souls fought with berserker intensity, believing themselves to be the Primarch himself at the moment of his death at the hands of Horus. Their madness made them terrifying to face, but also difficult to control, and losses among them were high as they hurled themselves into combat with no thought for self-preservation. Yet their sacrifice bought time for other forces to deploy and for the hive cities to prepare better defenses. Moria the Chosen, a Death Company dreadnought, became particularly notable during the Armageddon campaign. Already ancient before his fall to the Black Rage, Moria fought with the fury of the damned and the skill of a veteran captain. His dreadnought had been modified to allow him to quench the red thirst that accompanied his rage, a macabre accommodation that made him even more horrifying to behold. He carved through Orc mobs with abandon, his power fist crushing warbosses and his built-in weapons scything through infantry. When he finally fell, destroyed by concentrated fire from a battery of looted Imperial artillery, it took hours to recover his body, because the Orcs had piled so many of their dead around him that excavation was required. The Dark Angels have their own tales of mass dreadnought deployment, though true to their nature, many details remain classified even from other Imperial forces. During the Pandorax campaign, when a Daemon incursion threatened to tear open a new warp rift in an inhabited system, the Dark Angels deployed significant dreadnought support, including elements of their Deathwing Company's armored reserves. These ancients fought not just against daemons, but also against fallen angels who had aligned with the enemy, creating layers of tragedy as warriors who had once been brothers fought each other across millennia of separation and corruption. Ancient Helveticus, a Dark Angels dreadnought, whose service dated back to the chapter's founding, led elements of the defense against the Daemon Prince leading the invasion. His knowledge of the Fallen and their tactics, preserved across 10,000 years, proved invaluable in predicting enemy movements and countering strategies that would have surprised less experienced commanders. When the Daemon Prince finally fell, destroyed through combined efforts of Grey Knights, Terminators and Dark Angels dreadnoughts, Helveticus transmitted a simple message to Chapter Command: another page in an old book has been closed. What he meant by this remained unclear to those without knowledge of the Dark Angels' secret history, but those who understood recognized it as confirmation that one of the fallen had been accounted for. His betrayal finally answered with death. The Salamanders chapter, known for their compassion and their mastery of flame weapons, has deployed their dreadnoughts en masse on several occasions when civilian populations faced extinction-level threats. Their most notable such deployment occurred during the defense of Nocturne, when Dark Elder Raiders struck at the chapter's homeworld with unusual coordination and strength. The Salamander's ancients, including the legendary Brearth Ashmantle, fought a brutal campaign to protect the civilian settlements scattered across Nocturne's volcanic landscape. The terrain favored defensive operations, and the dreadnoughts used this to advantage, creating killing zones in the narrow passes between settlements where the raiders' superior speed and mobility were negated. Brayath Ashmantle personally accounted for 17 Dark Elder vehicles during the defense, his Dreadnought's heavy flamer and seismic hammer proving devastatingly effective against the Xenos raiders' light armor. When a homunculus-led force attempted to capture civilians for their grotesque experiments, Ashmantle led a counter-attack that resulted in the complete destruction of the raiding force at the cost of severe damage to his own chassis. He survived, though the repairs took months and required components salvaged from less fortunate ancients. His actions saved thousands of civilian lives and became the subject of songs still sung on Nocturne to this day. The Space Wolves have faced multiple occasions, requiring mass dreadnought deployment beyond just the Battle of the Fang. During the conflict known as the Months of Shame, when the chapter came into conflict with the Inquisition over the treatment of civilians who had been exposed to chaos during the First War for Armageddon, tensions nearly escalated to full-scale warfare between Imperial forces. Jorn the Fell-Handed was awakened to serve as arbitrator, his status as a living relic from the time of the Primarchs carrying weight that even the Inquisition could not ignore. Other ancients were prepared for deployment should negotiations fail, creating an implicit threat that sobered all parties involved and ultimately led to a resolution without bloodshed between loyalist forces. The Ultramarines, as befits their role as exemplars of the Codex Astartes, maintained detailed records of every dreadnought deployment in their chapter's history. Their documentation reveals patterns in how mass deployments occur, typically in response to threats that combine numerical superiority with qualitative challenges, requiring both the firepower and the tactical wisdom that ancients bring to bear. The Ultramarines have lost fewer dreadnoughts in mass deployments than many other chapters, a testament to their tactical acumen and their ability to extract maximum effectiveness from their ancients while minimizing unnecessary risk. During the Corinthian Crusade, when the Ultramarines prosecuted a campaign to reclaim worlds lost to Orc occupation, they deployed their dreadnoughts as siege breakers, using their heavy weapons and armored bulk to crack open fortifications that conventional forces struggled against. The ancients served in this capacity across multiple worlds, their accumulated experience with siege warfare proving invaluable. Losses were relatively light, only 3 dreadnoughts destroyed across the entire crusade, though this was partly due to the Ultramarines' practice of rotating ancients out of active service before their systems degraded to critical levels. The Black Templars, ever crusading, have deployed their dreadnoughts en masse on numerous occasions across their 10,000-year history. Their decentralized chapter structure means they maintain smaller concentrations of ancients in various crusade fleets, but when multiple fleets converge for particularly critical battles, the gathered dreadnoughts represent formidable force multiplication. During the Veracron Crusade, 5 separate Black Templars crusade fleets combined their efforts against a Necron tomb world, bringing with them a total of 37 dreadnoughts. The battle was brutal, the Necrons' ability to phase out and self-repair making them difficult opponents even for Space Marine ancients. 17 dreadnoughts were destroyed before the Necrons were finally forced to retreat into dormancy, losses that the Black Templars mourned but accepted as necessary for victory. Looking across these examples, certain patterns emerge. Mass dreadnought deployments occur when conventional force multiplication is insufficient, when the enemy is too numerous or too powerful, or too entrenched for standard tactics to prevail. They represent a chapter reaching into its deepest reserves, not just of material resources, but of spiritual and historical capital. The ancients who walk in these battles carry with them the weight of their chapter's legacy, their very presence serving to inspire younger brothers and intimidate enemies. The outcomes of these deployments vary. Sometimes they result in decisive victory, the overwhelming force brought to bear proving sufficient to break the enemy and secure critical objectives. Other times they are defensive successes, the threat contained or driven back but not eliminated, and occasionally they are tactical victories but strategic defeats, the battle won but at costs that leave the chapter weakened for years or even decades afterward. The constant across all these scenarios is the sacrifice of the ancients, warriors who gave everything because everything was required. What these examples demonstrate is that the decision to wake all the dreadnoughts is never made casually or frivolously. It represents a threshold crossing, an acknowledgement that normal measures will not suffice. And when that threshold is crossed, when the ancients all walk together toward battle, the outcome determines not just immediate victory or defeat, but the chapter's very survival. The battles become legends not just because of their scale or their violence, but because of what they represent, the Imperium's finest giving their last full measure of devotion to a cause that will outlive them all. The aftermath, what remains the days and weeks following a battle that required mass dreadnought deployment, are marked by a strange combination of relief and grief. The immediate crisis has passed. The chapter survived. The threat that seemed existential was defeated, or at least repelled. But the victory came at a cost that will be felt for generations, measured in the empty alcoves in the halls of the ancients, and the absence of voices that once counseled chapter leadership through their darkest hours. The first priority after the battle is always the recovery and interment of the fallen. This work continues for days or even weeks as search teams comb battlefields, identify damaged dreadnoughts, and carefully extract whatever can be salvaged. Sometimes this means recovering intact chassis that can be repaired and eventually re-interred with new pilots. Other times it means retrieving fragments, pieces of armor bearing the heraldry of fallen ancients that can be preserved as relics, even if the war machine itself is beyond recovery. And always it means the recovery of gene seed, that most precious resource that ensures the chapter's future. The tech marines who perform this work approach it with the reverence appropriate to handling holy relics. Each component is carefully documented, its condition assessed, its potential for reuse or repair evaluated. Damaged armor plates might be melted down and reforged for future use, their adamantium too valuable to waste. Weapons systems that survived their chassis' destruction can be refitted to other war machines. Power plants and drive systems can be salvaged for parts. Every piece of recoverable technology represents resources that the chapter cannot easily replace, making the recovery effort not just memorial but practical necessity. For the pilots who survived, their return to the halls of slumber is not immediate. Battle damage must be assessed and repaired first, a process that can take weeks or even months depending on severity. Some dreadnoughts return with only superficial damage, their armor scarred but systems intact. These can be returned to stasis relatively quickly after ceremonial blessings and standard maintenance. Others require extensive repairs, their chassis partially rebuilt, their life support systems overhauled, their neural interfaces recalibrated. For these ancients, the period between battle and sleep becomes an extended awareness, time to process what occurred and to mourn those who will not return. The psychological impact on surviving dreadnoughts manifests in different ways. Some withdraw into themselves, speaking less and less as they process the losses of brothers they had fought beside for centuries. These warriors often request immediate return to stasis, seeking escape from consciousness and the grief it brings. Others become more vocal, as if determined to preserve the memories of the fallen by speaking of them constantly. They share stories of battles fought together, tactical lessons learned, moments of humor in the midst of horror. This oral tradition serves to keep the fallen alive in memory, even as their physical forms are returned to the chapter's halls of remembrance. Chaplains make themselves available to the surviving ancients, offering spiritual counsel and the opportunity to unburden themselves of whatever weighs on their consciousness. Some dreadnoughts accept this offer, speaking at length about their experiences and their grief. Others decline, preferring to process their emotions internally or simply lacking the vocabulary to express what they feel. The chaplains do not press, understanding that grief takes different forms and that some warriors find comfort in silence rather than speech. The regular Space Marines who fought alongside the dreadnoughts also require processing time, though their path back to normalcy is different. They return to their squads and companies, resuming the routines of training and preparation that define Space Marine existence. But they carry with them the memory of fighting beside legends, of watching ancients who had endured for centuries fall in battle, of witnessing sacrifice on a scale that few Space Marines ever directly observe. These memories become part of their personal histories, shaping how they approach their own service. Some of the younger brothers seek out opportunities to visit the ancients before they return to stasis, wanting to thank them for their service or simply to maintain a connection to warriors who represent their chapter's living history. These visits are usually brief, the Dreadnoughts often too focused on their repairs or too withdrawn from grief to engage in extended conversation. But even brief acknowledgements can matter, small moments of connection between generations separated by centuries but united in service to the Emperor. The chapter's leadership must grapple with the strategic implications of the losses suffered. Each fallen ancient represents not just combat capability, but institutional knowledge that is now lost, tactical doctrines that existed only in the memories of warriors who had practiced them across hundreds of campaigns, must be reconstructed from fragmentary records and the recollections of those who served with the fallen. Strategic assessments that benefited from perspectives spanning centuries must now be made without those perspectives. The chapter adapts because it must, but the adaptation comes with the recognition that something irreplaceable has been lost. Recruitment and training intensify in the aftermath of such battles. The chapter needs to rebuild its strength, to replace losses sustained during the crisis that necessitated the mass Dreadnought deployment. But more than just numbers, the chapter needs to rebuild its expertise and experience. This is a slower process, requiring years or even decades of campaigning to develop warriors of sufficient skill that they might one day be worthy of interment should they fall. The chapter cannot simply replace a Dreadnought who served for 500 years with a newly inducted scout, but they can begin the long process of creating warriors who might one day accumulate such experience. The fortress monastery itself often bears the scars of whatever battle required the mass deployment. Walls must be rebuilt, defenses restored, sacred spaces reconsecrated. This physical reconstruction runs parallel to the chapter's spiritual and organizational reconstruction, both necessary for the chapter to return to full operational capability. The work is painstaking and often takes years, but it also provides a kind of therapeutic focus for the chapter, tangible progress toward restoration that helps offset the intangible losses that can never be fully recovered. The halls of the ancients are changed by the losses suffered. Empty alcoves stand where Dreadnoughts once rested, silent testimony to the price paid for victory. Some chapters leave these spaces empty permanently, treating them as memorials to the fallen. Others eventually fill them with newly interred warriors, pragmatism overcoming sentiment, because the chapter needs whatever combat capability it can muster. Neither approach is wrong. Both represent different ways of honoring the sacrifice, while acknowledging the demands of ongoing service. For the Dreadnoughts who return to stasis after such battles, the experience of waking alongside all their brothers and then sleeping again in diminished company creates unique psychological pressure. They are survivors of a battle that killed legends, and survivors' guilt is not unknown even to warriors as stoic as Space Marines. Some struggle with questions of why they survived when others fell, searching for meaning in randomness. Others simply accept their continued existence with fatalistic resignation, knowing that their own final battle is merely postponed, not avoided. The return to stasis is both relief and dread. Relief because consciousness itself is exhausting for warriors, trapped in mechanical shells, because the grief and isolation can be escaped through sleep. Dread because each time they sleep, they wonder what they will wake to, how much time will have passed, how much the world will have changed. But they accept the stasis because it is part of their existence, the price of continued service. The Tech Marines perform the rituals, the stasis fields activate, and one by one the surviving ancients slip back into the void, leaving the halls quiet once more. The chapter's culture is often subtly changed by such experiences. Tales of the battle join the chapter's oral tradition, becoming part of the stories that new recruits hear during their indoctrination. The fallen ancients become legendary figures, their deeds recounted alongside those of the chapter's Primarch and its greatest heroes. This serves both to honor them and to inspire future generations, showing through example what service to the Emperor might ultimately demand. Anniversaries of the battle are marked with ceremonies and remembrances, opportunities for the chapter to reflect on what was lost and what was preserved. Surviving Dreadnoughts are sometimes awakened specifically for these ceremonies. their presence lending weight and authenticity to the remembrance. They speak, when they choose to speak, of the brothers who fell, of the battle's desperate hours, of the choice to give everything, because the alternative was unacceptable. These testimonies become part of the chapter's permanent record, preserved for future generations who will face their own moments of crisis, the long-term impact of mass dreadnought deployment, and the inevitable losses that accompany it extends beyond simple military capability. The chapter becomes more cautious about when and how it uses its remaining ancients, the memory of losses suffered in forming future tactical decisions. But the chapter also becomes more aware of its own mortality and vulnerability, the illusion of invincibility shattered by the reality of desperate battle against overwhelming odds. This can be healthy, a source of humility that prevents arrogance, or it can be paralyzing, fear of loss preventing necessary risk-taking. The chapter's leadership must navigate this tension carefully. What remains after the battle, after the dead are mourned and the wounded return to sleep, is a chapter that has survived, but is changed. The survivors carry forward the memory of those who fell, ensuring that the sacrifice was not in vain. The chapter adapts to the loss of wisdom and experience that cannot be replaced, finding new ways to maintain effectiveness despite diminished resources. And the ancients who sleep in their halls dream, whatever dreams come to those trapped between life and death, waiting for the next time they are needed, knowing that each awakening might be their last. This is what remains: duty and memory, service and sacrifice, the eternal vigil of warriors who cannot rest, because rest would mean abandoning those they have sworn to protect. Conclusion: echoes of immortality. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the dreadnoughts stand as monuments to a particular kind of horror and nobility. They are warriors who should have died with honor on battlefields across the Imperium, their gene seed harvested and their memories cherished by their chapters. Instead, they were preserved through technology that is both blessing and curse, granted a form of immortality that comes at a price few can truly comprehend. They are simultaneously the Imperium's greatest heroes and its most tragic victims, exemplars of duty taken to its ultimate conclusion. When a chapter wakes all its dreadnoughts for a final battle, it represents the convergence of multiple catastrophes, the immediate tactical crisis that requires such desperate measures, the long accumulation of warriors whose sacrifice extended beyond death, and the recognition that even these ultimate reserves might not suffice. It is a moment of truth for any chapter, when all pretense is stripped away and only raw survival instinct remains. The ancients walk because they must, because they are the final asset to deploy, because if they are not enough, then nothing is. The experience reveals truths about the Imperium and the Adeptus Astartes that are often obscured by the pageantry and mythology that surrounds these legendary warriors. It shows that even space marines, for all their transhuman capabilities and psychological conditioning, are not immune to suffering or loss. It demonstrates that duty can become a form of torture when extended across centuries without respite. And it proves that courage is not the absence of fear or exhaustion, but the willingness to continue serving despite both, to fight one more battle when you have already fought hundreds or thousands, to give more when you have already given everything. The dreadnoughts themselves embody contradictions that define the Imperium. They are revered as honored ancients, but also pitied as trapped souls. They are treated as holy relics, but also deployed as weapons. They preserve institutional knowledge and tactical wisdom, but often at the cost of their own sanity and identity. These contradictions cannot be resolved, only acknowledged and accepted as part of the price the Imperium pays for its survival. Understanding what happens when all the dreadnoughts wake requires understanding not just the tactical specifics of such deployments, but their spiritual and psychological dimensions. It means recognizing that every one of those towering war machines contains a consciousness that remembers being mortal, that dreams of flesh and bone, even as it operates hydraulics and servos. It means acknowledging that the roar of assault cannons and the thunder of power fists represent not just firepower, but accumulated rage and grief, the fury of warriors who have endured beyond all reasonable limits and continue to endure because that is what they are. The battles themselves, dramatic as they are, matter less than what they reveal about those who fight them. When ancients walk together toward what might be their final combat, they do so knowing that death is not the worst thing that can happen to them, because they have been living with something worse than death for decades or centuries. Their courage lies not in the absence of desire for rest, but in the willingness to postpone that rest indefinitely if duty demands it. They fight not for glory or recognition, having long since moved beyond such concerns, but because they are space marines, and space marines do not abandon their posts while function remains. For those who witness these battles, who fight alongside the ancients, or who simply hear the tales afterward, the experience becomes formative. They see the price that service might eventually demand, the cost of being deemed too valuable to lose even when loss would be kinder. They learn that the Imperium's victories are built on sacrifices that extend beyond simple death, that the heroes they venerate are also victims of a system that values utility over mercy, and they must reconcile this knowledge with their own service, knowing that they too might one day face the choice between death and interment, between peace and eternal war. The legacy of these deployments extends across generations. Chapters remember the battles where their ancients walked together, preserving the stories as cautionary tales and inspiration simultaneously. The fallen are honored as chapter legends, their names carved in halls of remembrance and spoken during ceremonies. The survivors continue their vigils, sleeping away the years between awakenings, carrying forward memories that span centuries. And the chapter as a whole adapts to the losses sustained, finding ways to remain effective despite the permanent reduction in its oldest and wisest warriors. What makes the Dreadnoughts truly tragic is not their suffering, though that is real and profound. It is that their suffering serves a purpose, that their continued existence, painful as it is, genuinely helps protect the Imperium and preserve their chapters. They are not tortured for sadistic pleasure or meaningless tradition. They endure because their presence on the battlefield saves lives, wins battles, ensures that the Imperium continues to stand against the darkness that presses in on all sides. This makes their sacrifice meaningful, but also impossible to repudiate. They cannot claim that their suffering is pointless because it demonstrably is not. They can only endure, and endure they do. The question of whether interring space marines in dreadnoughts is justified has no easy answer. From a purely utilitarian perspective, the practice preserves combat capability and institutional knowledge that would otherwise be lost. From an ethical perspective, it perpetuates suffering and denies warriors the rest they have earned. Both perspectives are valid, and the Imperium chooses utility over mercy because the Imperium believes, perhaps correctly, that mercy is a luxury it cannot afford. The dreadnoughts themselves seem to accept this calculus, serving without complaint because complaint would dishonor their sacrifice and undermine the meaning they have constructed from their suffering. In the end, the story of what happens when all the dreadnoughts wake is a story about the price of survival in a hostile universe. It is about warriors who gave everything and were then asked to give more. It is about chapters that survived existential threats because they were willing to expend resources they could not replace. It is about the terrible mathematics of warfare, where victory sometimes requires sacrificing the irreplaceable. And it is about the endurance of the human spirit, even when that spirit is trapped in a mechanical shell and divorced from everything that once made it human. The ancients will continue their vigil as long as the Imperium endures, sleeping and waking in cycles that span centuries, fighting battles that blur together in memory, serving an emperor who has been dead for 10,000 years and yet whose Imperium continues through sheer momentum and the sacrifice of countless warriors. They are the price the Imperium pays for its continued existence, the cost of resisting entropy and chaos for just one more generation. And when the final battle comes, when the threats facing the Imperium become so overwhelming that even awakening all the dreadnoughts will not suffice, they will walk anyway, because that is what they are and what they have always been. Warriors who refuse to stop fighting until destroyed. Before you go, if you found this deep dive into the horror and nobility of dreadnought deployment meaningful, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. It helps us continue exploring the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40k universe and sharing these stories of sacrifice and service with all of you. And if there are other aspects of the setting you would like us to investigate, leave a comment below and let us know. The grim darkness of the far future contains countless tales of horror and heroism, and we are committed to bringing them to light. Thank you for watching, and may the Emperor protect you.